would like to dedicate this film to all those hard-working members who are no longer with us, and a special dedication to Anne Fulham, Pat's lovely wife, who supported him in his work for the museum over many years. Some of the Dublin electric tram cars were of the finest specimens of craftsmanship and were considered second to none. This tram, with its angular windscreen, was known as the Coffin and was the first electric tram to provide shelter for the driver. It was richly ornate with Grecian fretwork and unending golden nuts. Perhaps the finest tram of all was the Director's Car, built at Spa Road Works in 1900 and considered to be the most elite and lavishly appointed tram car ever built. It optimised the grandeur of the electric tramway era, the extravagances and pompousness of the Dublin United Tramways, for whom the tram was custom built. After the labour problems of 1913, it was at the director's peril that they should tempt fate by appearing in their royal carriage, and the tram was negated to the role of festivals and ceremonial occasions. No detail or effort was spared to ensure that only the best of materials and craftsmanship went into her construction, and the end result was a machine of great magnificence, if not a little vainglorious. At the closure of the tramway system in Dublin in 1949, the tram was offered to the National Museum, who declined to take it on the grounds that it wasn't in the national interest, and a new home was sought through the ages of the press. The Fine Gael Taoiseach of the day, Mr. Cosgrave, ruled that the tram should be presented to a barrister in Dalkey, Mr. Horace Porter, who was a trustee of Fine Gael, on condition that the tram should not be scrapped or be sold abroad, and that he undertake to preserve the tram. In autumn 1984, the interior of the tram was photographed to capture some of the craftsmanship and extravagance of detail that went into her construction. The fineness of this artwork and the attention to perfection in every way was the hallmark of this most fascinating of tram cars. A Waterford crystal lamp supported on elegant and ornate brassware brackets reminds one of a day that will never reappear. Each quarter-light window was etched and richly stained in colour, alas, not captured in this black and white film of scenes from a Dublin that was once considered to be the second city of the British Empire. Although the windows were stained with dust and the algae of time, the beauty of these little masterpieces would not be denied. Each a work of art, and each capturing the magic of a city to be considered by many to be sadly in decline. The delights of Edwardian days, the walks along the many promenades, the military bands that struck a marching air, somehow still survive in the shadows of this little tram, where the charm of perhaps better days still live on. When the Transport Museum Society opened their depot in Castle Rotherry, County Wicklow in 1974, Mr. Horace Porter was approached and asked to consider presenting the tram to our society, and that we would place it under cover immediately, and we even undertook at our own expense the cost of restoring the tram to its former glory. Year after year we pleaded with Mr. Porter to give us the tram, and that I personally, with my restoration team, undertook to supervise this task. After all, the work on the restoration of the Illivo Tram No. 9 was now advanced, and the expertise gained on perhaps the world's oldest tram from the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland and the Dublin Horse Tram conversion would assure the expertise required to perform the restoration work. We offered Mr. Porter money. We offered that he should retain the ownership of the tram and that we simply hold it in trust for him and for the nation, but our constant pleas appeared to fall on deaf ears. An article that appeared in a newspaper in 1984 betrayed the seclusion conclusion of the tram and revealed the value of its contents. And although well-meaning, we feared the worst. Less than a fortnight later, the tram was attacked by vandals, and the crystal lamps and stained glass windows were stolen, and the remainder of the tram set on fire. When I visited the tram some days later, the pungent smell of smoke lay heavily about. The saloon was just a charred remains, and the magic was all gone. All that stood before me was the ghost of some splendid skeleton that was once the king of trams. The glories of the past were no more than crumbling ashen fragments. Whatever about the theft of its precious contents, the needless destruction made no sense to me. To rob the tram of its riches was bad enough, but to destroy the tram, in my opinion, was unforgivable. This was part of the nation's heritage, the labour of honest Dublin men, long gone, now consumed in smoke. I could not understand the point of it all. A tarnished corpse was all that remained. As a restorationist, I realised that the tram could still be saved, but it must be placed under cover without delay. I wrote to Mr. Porter several times, again pleading with him to reconsider. I asked him how much he wanted for the tram. At last he contacted me and told me how stressed the whole affair was for him, and that he would be seeking a malicious damages claim in compensation. I don't know if he intended to give us the tram, or if the compensation was to assist with the cost of restoration. All I knew was that time was running out, and that unless something was done at once, it would be too late. 1986, a large sewer was laid in the lands adjoining the tram, bringing it further into view and at greater risk. Permission from Mr. Porter carried out a survey of the remains. On Tuesday, the 24th of February 1987, myself and Bill Garriott met Mr. Porter for the first time with John Kennedy of the Railway Record Society to discuss the future of the tram. John was involved with the forensic investigation after the fire and confirmed that it was theft and there wasn't a shard of stained glass or pellets of molten brass in evidence. Mr. Porter asked us to prepare a report on museum letterhead stating that the cost of restoring the tram would be in the region of £30,000. He stated that he would undertake to permit us to restore the tram should the local authority give him the money to do so. I understood that on the strength of our detailed report that Mr. Porter received a substantial sum of money, and he gave us permission at last to remove the tram. No money was received from Mr. Porter. Undaunted, the day of the tram's liberation came at last in spring 1988, and fearful that Mr. Porter might change his mind, we moved in like stormtroopers under the leadership of General Pat Fulham. Moving the tram would be one of the most difficult tasks undertaken by the society, and there was every risk that the tram could fall over. To prevent this, Pat had to underpin the tram in its position, which was weakened when the adjoining ground was lowered to allow the sewer to proceed sometime previously. It was therefore necessary to erect a platform from old sleepers with rail laid on top, held together by gridwork made by John Kelleher and used previously in the movement of the Hill of Hope tram. The director's tram was then lifted onto the platform, which had the rails running onto a CIE load loader. The Fulhams were there in strength on the day, and while Pat gave us the orders, his lovely wife Anne served tea and sandwiches to give us the strength to obey. Pat's brother Paul pulled the low loader in the Fulham farm tractor. It was a tired but triumphant team that posed in front of the camera later that evening. For the summer months, the tram stayed at Broadstone, covered with tarpaulins to protect it from the weather. We were unable to find a place to store her until her time for restoration, and the society decided to bring her to Oath before the advance of winter. As usual, Danny Marr drove the low loader, which was presented to our society as a gift by Bus Éireann and which will prove very useful over the years ahead in transporting some of our larger vehicles. The journey through the city was uneventful, and quite a few old-timers began to stare in wonder as this burnt-out contraption, hardly recognisable I'm sure, that she was once considered to be the king of trams. It was necessary to empty the museum of much of her contents to make room for the new arrival, and this was one of the rare occasions when each of the exhibits could be viewed to good advantage, as usually they are stored sardine fashion on account of the grave shortage of space. It is often only on these occasions that the beauty and variety of our vehicles can be truly appreciated. The Master of Ceremonies for the day was John Kelleher, with the ever-watchful Danny and Michael to lend a word of advice. A platform of rails held firmly by a grid was erected behind the low loader, and the tram would be winched onto these and carefully lowered by releasing a hawser little by little. The descent was slow and exacting. A runaway tram would be a grave danger and no chance could be taken. The angle of descent was critical and our first efforts proved too acute. It was necessary to pull the tram backwards to change the angle, and it took a few efforts to succeed. Once the tram was finally down, it was only a matter of the team pushing her back alongside her rural sister from Howth. The hard-working team was Kevin Carlton, Bill Garriott, Annie Maher, Ryan Green, John Kelleher, Michael Erity, Bert Brown, Jim Crossland, Paddy MacDonald, Michael Corcoran, Pat Fulham, Graham, Johnny Grace, Young Kelleher, Mick O'Shea, our custodian, and not to forget Ellie. At the present time, bringing the matter up to date for March 2024, 36 years ago. The Hill of Howth tram will be fitted on its refurbished and remotored bogies later this year. Number 224, which was to be completed as a horse tram, is now a Dublin open front car representing what would have run in the streets of Dublin since 1896. It has been our money earner, appearing in many films and events and earning from advertisements, but has now been retired. The Causeway tram, with tremendous input from John Wheatley, is ready to be glazed and dashed. And the bogie standard number 253, also restored and is on display. Visit the museum and see these for yourselves. Spare a thought for all those hard-working museum volunteers who gave of their time willingly and unselfishly in restoring our worthwhile transport heritage. As the Director of Tram Restoration, I have selfishly indulged my story about the trams, but the same story relates to all our other restoration projects. Without their hard work and commitment, many of these mechanical gems would have been lost. By the way, at the early stages of this film I spoke about Horace Porter. I mentioned he was a trustee for Fine Gael, and had he not taken the tram in the first instance, it could have been lost, and this film would have had a very different outcome. Those who knew him said he was a thorough gentleman and a kind landlord and a very generous man.
Well, that's the story about the director's tram. Its almost demise at the time of the fire, the rescue by our society. It is now set aside safely under cover, awaiting its turn of restoration. I hope you've enjoyed this film. Thank you for watching.